Hello, everyone, and welcome to the paddock. My name is Henrik.
And my name is Sierra, and we are going over our F1 review of Baku 2024.
Yep, and let's start with qualifying.
Is there much? There's a lot that happened. First and foremost, it was confirmed going up into this week. Two things. One, Oliver Behrman was taking over for Kevin Magnussen for his race ban. No
Yes.
surprise there.
No, I was very happy about that.
Nice to see Behrman in what will be his seat next year. And also early in the week, the second biggest secret of the paddock, Adrian Newey had announced he will be going to Aston Martin. Did you forget about that tidbit?
No, I'm just very upset about it.
Where did you want him to go?
I wanted him to go to Ferrari.
Yes and no. I think I have come to a understanding of why Ferrari didn't. Let me explain.
All right.
One, no denying that Adrian Newey is one of the best aerodynamic designers in F1 history. He's won with Williams, he won with McLaren, he won with Red
Red Bull.
Bull, and now he'll be going to Aston. So I cannot deny that part. He's also said he also wanted to work with Ferrari, he wanted to work with Lewis, and he wanted to work with Alonso. He is getting to work with Alonso.
But why on earth would he sell his soul to the Stroll Corporation?
So we have to remember he's turning 65 or is around 65. He's in his upper 60s.
Yes.
So you have to think if he's going to Maranello, they would probably want him to relocate. So that would be uprooting his family to go to Italy, as much as I think some of us would agree, and I think maybe if he was a little younger, he would. But I think another reason it wasn't down to the teams, it was what he was asking for, I think. And from what I understand, he was asking for basically a lot of power, basically becoming a second team principal. And I think with what Fred was looking for, trying to make a cohesive group, trying to rebuild Ferrari back up to what they need, I think it was better for that not to go about because of the dynamic that might happen. If you have people constantly bickering or disagreeing, or if Adrian is vetoing all these things, it does change a lot what you can do. And if you recall, the next regulation change, so 2026, it is more to do with engines. Yes, you still have that dynamic aerodynamic ability, and it's still
Yes.
going to be important, but it is also an engine regulation. And
Yes.
the last time Newey was in a team with an engine regulation change, I'm not saying this is going to happen necessarily, but that team, I believe it was Red Bull, it's not like the car still did well, but it wasn't like there were other issues, and he wasn't as his part wasn't as like did it made a difference, but not as much. It was more down to an engine. So I don't know if that's is going to help or hurt Aston.
Nope. But okay, he is in his late 60s, well, mid 60s, technically. But why on earth would he sell his soul to Lawrence Stroll, knowing that they focus on absolutely one driver? The second driver is just this wooden marionette doll. He has to.
Well, if rumors are to be believed, according to Papa Stroll, now that they've signed Newey, the ultimate goal is to sign Max. And then the lineup, again, this is all pinches of salt. The lineup would be Max and Alonso, and Stroll would go to the WEC project, I believe.
Uh,
Or Stroll and Max.
Most likely the second option.
Uh, well, I mean, with Newey coming, Fernando is probably never going to retire, but
Well, we have heard of that before.
But that's the major news.
Yep,
I've accepted it. It's fine.
and I have not. I have still not accepted it. I will not accept it until I see
Well,
that man in the Aston Martin garage.
and to be fair, he's not the impact he'll have on Aston won't come until 2026, and even
No,
then, you're still maybe looking at 2027 for when you'll actually get his full, because there's a lot that they need to fix. Yes, we're getting a new regulation change, yes, they're getting their wind tunnel set up and everything else like that. But you still have
and
it's still gonna take time.
and yes, they're getting the Honda engine with that regulation change, but that shouldn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But
Well, it'll be the first time that Aston will be with a works. They're not they've been with Mercedes for the longest time. It will be the first time that Aston will be producing all of its own mechanical components.
yes,
So that's another thing to take into place. So yes, you
and
have Newey going there, but you also have all these other changes.
yes, and thus the Honda employees that are now working for Red Bull will switch to Aston Martin.
Which is why I believe the Yuki Tsunoda rumors have been so heavy about if he doesn't go up to like the main team at Red Bull, does he at one point switch over to Aston because of the Honda ties?
Yes,
We'll
he
see if that's the case.
mm, he does have the Honda ties, so that might be, but also Ayumu Iwasa, which was a pretty good F2 driver for Dams last year. He also has the Honda ties, so it
I mean,
could be the two of them.
well, we won't know until it happens, but
No,
those are the announcements for this week before we
no,
get into
yeah,
the actual race, but we
yeah,
will move to qualifying.
yes.
God, qualifying was good.
Yeah, qualifying was amazing.
Qualifying gave Monaco vibes.
Absolutely. And with Behrman stepping in, it wasn't really as bad that this usually is.
Both rookies did really well.
Yes. Of course, Colapinto had bad luck out in Monza last time. He hit the gravel, the stop, and not qualify better than P18.
Both each had a crash in practice, but also Leclerc had a crash in practice, so we can't fault him.
No, that was through no fault of his own, seemingly.
Yeah,
But there is one major thing to note. Behrman didn't make Q3, whereas Colapinto did.
we'll go into these results. So surprised. So out of Q3 or Q1, out in Q1, everybody you expect to be out in Q1 except a specific Lando Norris.
Yes, Lando Norris was the shock of the weekend. For many, of course, he didn't explain or ask anyone about anything.
So I watched some of the onboards. I replayed it. So it seems to be two issues that happened. So one, during that last lap, you had Esteban Ocon hitting the wall, getting a puncture. So he basically became a mobile chicane. At some point, I believe during the same lap, there was a yellow flag going into section 2, and Max was hitting into that section. So it was like, will this cause Max to have an issue? By the time Lando got to it, there had been a brief. So the Lando's coming down into section 3. You had the yellow flag pop up briefly in the area. So you had him lift, which is the
Yeah.
first problem. So he can't. So if where he was, he technically couldn't have gone faster, or as the yellow flag states. The
No.
next issue is a driver mistake that he had, and I will say it. I will happily say it's a driver mistake. People can yell at me later for it, but yes, he's gonna lift, but he overshot the corner.
But the strange thing is that he didn't come on the radio. He didn't really explain anything
I
to
think he was just
anyone.
more annoyed than anything. I mean, you
Yes,
saw his
but
entire demeanor at the end of that.
yes, but of course that doesn't explain why he didn't come on the radio to the team and explain anything.
I think it was kind of straightforward. I'm not defending him. I'm not denying it. But I don't think there was more he could have said. I think he came on the radio to ask, "Do we have time for another?" And he's like, "No." Like his race engineer said, "No." I think it does
Hmm.
kind of fall down to one, his first laps that he put in weren't enough buffer for him,
But they
but
were good laps, so.
they were good laps, but he was down, I believe, in 16th, or he would have been 17th, is where he was sitting at the time.
Mm.
So it was just a misfortune for him. I think his race wasn't ruined going into it. I think he was going to be fine to make through the field just because that McLaren is so much faster and you can overtake in Baku. But it was made note that it was a miscued. It wasn't a good qualifying for him.
No, it wasn't. But Williams had a surprisingly good qualifying, which
Something
was.
else we need to note, Joe Granu did not qualify last. Yes, he did start last because he had an engine penalty, but he
Mm,
out-qualified Esteban Ocon.
yes.
Did
And
want to
of
make
course,
that note.
there were a lot of engine-related penalties being
Yeah,
handed out for the race.
a lot of teams took some components. I'm surprised that Lando didn't, but I guess for their strategy, it might have been for the best that he didn't. We go further on, of course, Pierre Gasly did originally qualify in P13, but he was disqualified after. So a good
Mm.
result for him took him out pretty quickly.
And the major good surprise of the weekend was, of course, Oli Behrman, which qualified P11,
Same spot as I'm pretty sure it was
Saudi Arabia.
Jeddah.
Mm.
Yeah.
So he lacks P11. He missed out on 100th of a second.
He seemed gutted. It looked like a good lap for him too going into that, but I guess
Yep.
he locked up somewhere in section 2 and that just kind of did him in. But I mean, in only a second race, not bad at all, especially to keep it for the most part clean in qualifying.
No, not bad. Especially when you think of the people that were behind him.
Hmm.
There were a lot of big names in that mix as well, so not a bad thing to do.
I mean, he got clipped by Alonso. That's who took him. That's who got into Q3 over Behrman. So
Yeah, but only by 100th, so you can't really
uh
fault him for that.
I mean it was 100 off Albon because Albon was 10th going into it.
Mm.
So he almost got the second Williams or first, yeah, whichever way you want to see it. He almost took out a Williams and it wasn't Franco.
No, he almost outqualified a Williams on merit, which was a good thing to do considering that he was in a Haas that wasn't his own.
I mean, he outqualified Hulkenberg, which is
Mm.
the main thing I think you can take away from
Yeah,
that qualification because
which I get.
Hulkenberg is been on a tear and has been in that car the entire year and looked fabulous in that car for the most part. So,
Mm. Yeah, look at Canada this year. It was Haas masterclass.
I mean, look at Silverstone.
Yeah, that too. Of course, a lot of good races for them, but not very many points.
So we have then going into Q3, you had the Mercedes looked good during practices, and then I feel like we got baited again. You had Max looking nowhere at all during those sessions. The Ferraris looked really good. We'll get to them in a second. You had Oscar looking also really good. You had Perez probably back in form. Perez, I don't know if this is just because he really likes this track, but I'm hoping he can turn it around. I'm hoping this is for the rest of the season he can start performing like this so we get those top 8 fully challenging for the leads and poles. But I mean, what happened after this race, I don't know how that's gonna go.
No, and of course, Singapore is a place where he has been very good in the past few seasons. He won in 2022 despite a 5-second penalty. He placed, what was it? Third last year?
Red Bull did not place third last year. Red Bull looked to nowhere last year. They both went out in
Right.
Q2
Right.
because
Right.
Lawson.
Right. Yeah, Lawson. That thing.
But I guess there's two other key points. So you had Franco Colapinto out qualifying Albon in the second run, and not to take anything away from his lap. That was a fantastic lap.
Mm-hmm.
But you kind of have to blame Williams a little bit because what happened was Albon goes out for his second quali lap at the end, and they don't take a fan out of his car, and the guy has to park up in the pit lane exit and throw a fan to the side. And I'm sitting there looking at my screen and like yelling at the marshal, please take the dang fan. Help the man. I was like, are we getting a red flag here? What's happening?
Yeah, that was a very similar reaction to my own. I was just thinking, what's happening? And
How did they not see it? It was neon green. It was Lando Norris's helmet color. How do you not see that?
oh no, it was sour green. Oh Jesus
No,
Christus.
neon green. There's a difference in color.
Uh,
But yeah, so by the time Alex got going, one, it did not ruin George's lap because George was one of the first people out, and there was a yellow flag sitting in section one for a bit while Albon took care of the fan, but it did not affect anything. But by the time he got to the line, he just missed out. I believe he was over the line like 1 or 2 seconds after the fact. So again, not taking anything away from Franco, but maybe a pinch of salt there just because of you had to think that Alex 1 looked rapid all weekend going into this. They had been really close throughout the whole weekend too, so not saying they weren't on the same pace because again, they both made it to Q3, but just a little bit of a pinch of salt for there because I know I saw some people on Twitter saying, "Do you think Albon's overrated now?" Yet like this, that, and the other thing, and I think people may have been overreacting a bit.
just to put the nail in the coffin for them and say, no, he isn't overrated.
I think if anything, this proves that the Williams, and again, no offense to Logan, but this just proves that the Williams is actually, I think, a lot better than what was being shown. But I think I will, again, pinch of salt here. They do have a lot more upgrades on the car. So I think if anything, it shows that Williams upgrade pattern and what they were doing in terms of where they were developing the car is there.
Yes, and especially with both Williams cars scoring points,
Yes.
which is no mean feat at
We have
this
both
stage.
Williams scoring points. We have both Haas's scoring points. I think it is a decent shout to say Williams could get sixth, I believe.
That sounds about. It sounds reasonable.
The other keynote from the qualifying is we have Charles Leclerc getting his fourth pole, putting 3/10 on everybody. That man and this circuit, even though he had a crash in FP1, it's like he's playing on a sim. It's like he's playing on the game. This track just seems to be like his bread and butter.
Yes, it feels very homely to him.
I think it reminds him of Monaco. I think because he's really good at Monaco qualifying. But I think listening to the P1 podcast, I think Tommy talks about how you can't after this performance, and I think just in general, even if Charles never wins a world championship, which God forbid doesn't happen, he should absolutely Ferrari give him a car. He will go down as one of the best qualifiers in the sport. And I believe that wholeheartedly.
He is a good qualifier. I won't take that away from him, but he is not a good pole converter.
See, and okay, so we're gonna go into a debate here because I think where this comes down to is half the time with his poles, because he is such a good qualifier, he's outperforming that car, and that car can only do so much in a race. You also have to remember that Ferrari strategies have not always worked.
Mhm.
So I want to say that it's not due. He has made mistakes. Do not get me wrong. Look at France in 2022. But there are definitely other key factors to why it's such a damning statistic. I think, in my opinion, Lando's statistics is a little bit more damning than
Mm.
Leclerc's statistic. But
But do remember that Leclerc has also been racing in F1 for a bit longer than what Norris
a
has.
year.
But still, a few races more.
You're right, but I think it shows that Charles can outperform his car. Again, I'm not denying the fact that
Mm.
he has not always converted his poles, more or less has not converted his poles, but I think that says more about just him out delivering a car
Uh,
in one lap.
all right, hear me out. If we were to remove the top four teams from the grid entirely and just have the midfielders and backmarkers, who would win?
In terms of qualifying or in terms of
Everything. Uh,
everything?
mm.
So we're taking out top four.
Yes.
Alonso.
Okay.
Because he's not in the top four. Aston Martin's not in the top four.
No, true, but would a Ferrari-powered car be capable of scoring points? That's my point here.
I mean, you have the Haas, so yes.
All right, so you're not wasting time on the neon dustbins.
They have so many other issues that I'm not. They're changing teams as well, so I'm not. I think they're kind of the back burner of Ferrari. I think
Mm,
Ferrari's not as focused on them because again, they are switching development teams here.
right, but as it stands, would Stroll be P2 then if we were to remove the top four
No,
teams entirely?
no.
All right, give me your top five.
Give me in terms of drivers and what cars they're in,
Yeah,
probably Alonso, Albon, Yuki, Hulkenberg, Danny.
right. Yeah, I can get behind that.
I don't see the Alpines being anywhere. Maybe Pierre as a shout out, but definitely both V carbs. Franco is still too early for me to say, and Magnussen's. If you had to ask me between Magnussen and Nico, I pick Nico.
Yep. Magnussen is kind of this. I'm tempted to say mobile
Chicane,
traffic cone. I'm tempted to say,
chicane.
yeah, chicane
Also
traffic
out of the
cone. Yeah.
Magnussen's not on the grid next year. Hulkenberg is. That tells you all you need to know.
Yeah, but like we have established, he will be on the grid in what will effectively be a neon dustbin.
I think Nico knows that. He knew that going into it. He's playing for 2026, 2027.
Yep,
We'll see if
and his
we'll see if
contract ends in 2027, so
yeah, but
that'll be interesting.
we'll see what he can do. I think he's definitely a better driver than I believe Bottas and Zhou at this point. So I think there's a chance.
Uh,
I also believe that he can help kind of get Sauber slash Audi back into a productive and point scoring position because look at Haas before he came into the fold. Like look at not saying last
oh,
year, but look at this year. Yes,
oh,
again, you have Steiner not there anymore, but I think you also have to throw that down to Nico because so many other drivers speak so highly of him that
mm,
it is, I think, also down to who you have in the team.
yeah, and Nico Hülkenberg isn't a bad driver by any means. He has,
Should have had a podium by now.
yes, and also possibly a win if things were to go his way.
I mean,
We
every time he was supposed to go for a podium, it was going to be a win. So,
Yes, that's why I'm saying it. If he would have raced for one of the top four, so being Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, if he had rest for one of those, he would probably have had a slew of wins by now.
But I think that does qualifying. I don't think there's anything other main
Mm,
note.
no.
So we'll just go over the starting grid quickly because there were a lot of engine penalties taken. So, of course, the top three stayed the same, which was the same as Monaco, by the way. It was Charles, Oscar, Sainz.
So
But
basically, this
rehash it out.
McLaren sandwich.
No, Ferrari sandwich.
Oh, sorry, Ferrari sandwich.
It's okay. So, with Gasly's disqualification, it does move up everybody a grid place. So you had Norris now starting in P15, or he eventually moved up to P15 because you had Lewis taking a engine. So I believe he started from the pit lane. So definitely helped Lando there a bit, which I think is another reason why he didn't take an engine penalty and didn't switch any of his components. I also think that maybe McLaren's waiting till Texas or even Brazil just because it's a lot easier to maneuver and make up track positions that way.
Right. And that being said, the race was very entertaining.
It was not a lot happened in that first. There was some contact. Of course, Yuki did end up having to be our first retirement. I believe it was a collision with Stroll.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which again gave Stroll a puncture,
He
which
also
caused him
didn't
to retire on what was the
lap
fourth
45.
lap.
So Yuki retired lap 14 because had a giant hole in his side pod, and then Lance retired many laps after lap 45. So it was unfortunate.
So one retirement on lap 14 and flash forward 31 laps and
Well, flash forward to the first pits. You had Pierre, or not Pierre, you had Perez being one of the first to pit to try and overcut Oscar and Leclerc. You
mm,
had Lando making a charge, being on the alternate strategy of being on the hards, working his way through the field. Definitely helped with holding back Sergio after he pitted to help Oscar to keep him in line. The thing I don't get is what happened when Leclerc went into his pit stop because he had a 6 second buffer over Oscar because he fell away. One, I don't know why they didn't keep him out maybe a little longer just to build that gap, but I don't know what happened in his out lap or in lap to cause
mm,
him to lose that 6 seconds. I don't know if it was on the in the pits. I don't know what happened, but basically his 6 second buffer got nicked, and that caused the top three to be close again. And then you had, of course, Oscar making his late lunge,
mm,
as to say, to take the
yep.
lead for the last 30 some laps, I think it was. It was like, will Charles make a lunge? We all know, I think Charles will absolutely make a lunge. I think he's more of a late lunge, like later in like in the race to make a lunge. Look at his F2 days, look at look at Vegas last year. So he's not going to make a lunge, but he's also going to be he's someone who's more patient, and I think that plays a lot more into the head of who he goes against. I think that's
Mm,
why him and Max are such good racers, and when they're at the front racing, it is so incredibly exciting to watch. I think that's what also makes Charles dangerous to other competitors because of who he has constantly raced against. I think that's what makes, in my opinion, I love watching wheel to wheel battles. It's my favorite thing, but seeing there's something different about watching Max and Charles fight than like the two of them than and then watching the either Charles fight Oscar or Max fight Lando. You get a different sense. And I think
mm,
they both learn so much from each other growing through the sport that it's hard to kind of fight them in the race because you don't know the mindset they I think they play more head games in a sense.
which in most cases is very entertaining, like it was today.
But I think this shows, if anything, Oscar is just like has such a cool head. Like by the first time he made a mistake, coming out of 16, Leclerc also made a mistake. The drift, if you know the two drifts, like you think if Charles maybe didn't do that, he gets the run and he takes back the lead, and then it's a different story. But even as a Leclerc fan, as a Ferrari fan, am I upset that he didn't win? Yes. Am I upset of the race and how it happened? No, because it was a race basically the entire time. Oscar defended as well as he did. Charles attacked as well as he did. Charles just his rears ended up coming out from under him first. I think
Mhm.
that goes down to how close they were when he came out of the pits originally, so he didn't get as well as a outlap to build them.
And for someone like me as well, right? I'm a science fanboy. I'm not gonna hide it. Am I upset that he retired? Yes, but am I upset over the circumstances? No.
So after the race, there were a lot of infringements with the safety car that happened due to the second to last lap. So what had happened was Oscar had at this point pulled, I believe, a 3-second gap. Leclerc had no rears. So, and because of all the fighting, one Perez got back into the fight, but also it allowed Sainz to catch up. So you had what became a three-car battle for second. Charles defended Sergio coming off of turn one. You had then in turn three, Sergio tried to make another move. It didn't work out, so Sainz slipped through. Charles was still in front. Sainz was on the outside wall. Checo was on the inside, and it looked like Checo was trying to pull the slipstream from Charles in second, was behind Sainz. Sainz is coming back into the racing line because, again, he's right by the wall. And Checo doesn't seem to move at all. And Carlos, I wouldn't say didn't see him, but you would expect him to move a bit because, again, we are coming up to braking zones and such. And he is behind him. And you have Checo's front right tire and Carlos's back left tire smushing, and just both of them ends their race.
Yep. And of course, as its resident Carlos Sainz fanboy, do I understand why they retired? Yes. Am I upset? No, because it wasn't. It was by no fault of their own. It was
I mean, I think
purely circumstantial. It had nothing to do with anyone apart from the circumstances.
the only thing I'll say is maybe Checo gives a lit like my thing is, where is Carlos supposed to go in this sense? I'm not saying like major like he should get major penalty points or anything like that, but I'm just saying in terms of reaching, Carlos is on the wall. He has to come in. Checo is in the middle of the road, so it is going to be natural that you Carlos is going to shift, and Checo was, unless Checo was planning, he should have moved over more, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying it should have been avoidable, but it is what it is. It kind of throws into question what happens now with Checo, because Helmut Marko has stated that they will know who's in the seat. They'll have clarification by the end of Singapore for that seat.
Yes, we have
So
heard this
in
before. End of Spa.
Well, no, it was supposed to be end of Spa, and then there's rumors about that.
Okay, we've heard this before. We've heard end of Spa, and what will then happen at the end of Singapore?
We'll see, but I feel bad for both. I think if they would have stayed clean, you would have had on the podium, it would have been Oscar, Sainz, and Perez, or it would have been Oscar, Charles, and then Carlos basically defending Charles. I think that's what have been the team orders at that point, to try and get Ferrari the most points possible in the constructor fight. Going further down for the point finishers, so we had Oscar finishing first, you had Charles finishing second, you had George Russell, who is apparently just the wizard when it comes to collisions, getting third. Lando making a charge up. Again, we had two retirements, but you had him in fourth, and he does get the fastest lap. Max finished in fifth. He, at that point, pitted to get fastest lap, and then, of course, we end under a safety car, so we don't, or a virtual safety car, so we can't get that. You have Fernando Alonso finishing in sixth, Alex finishing in seventh, Franco in eighth, Lewis in ninth, and Oliver Behrman in 10th. Shout out to Alex, one, to keep Lando behind him as long as he did, and then two, to being running in third for like
Five
five
laps.
to five to three, 5 to like almost 7, 8 laps. I was, as much as I didn't want a safety car, I wanted a safety car because like that was that was a good that was a good drive. Yes, he finished in seventh, so not exactly. It doesn't tell the story of where he was, but if you watch the race, it is important to note. But the other thing is we do have so we have Franco scoring points for Williams. He scored 4 points. Williams making their case with 4 and 6 getting 10 points. And then Oliver Behrman also getting a point in there. Just outdoing Nico. He showed the maturity I think Haas was looking for. It definitely this race gives that statement of he is there, he is justified for being there.
Yes.
Haas and Ferrari have Haas for taking him, but also Ferrari to be happy with their academy driver to show that I guess that they have their development is working with their young talent.
In short, Behrman is a good driver, and if you say otherwise,
you can get in the bin.
Yeah. If you say otherwise, the entire F1 community will be after you and slaughter you.
I don't think they'll do that. I mean, some might. There are some crazies out there. I mean, the fact that his first 2 races, he scored points with 2 different teams, especially because a lot of the people were like, well, it's because he was in a Ferrari. He should have been scoring that way, especially because even now, Ferrari looks like they're back to being the second, even maybe the best car on the grid. I think they definitely had the best, in this race at least, they had the best car. And I'm not even just saying that because it's Charles. Like, if you look at the second stint, Charles even said, like, because he lost that hard running time in practice 1 from when he crashed, and then also a little bit in practice 2 because they still had to fix the car. He had a different setup for the race, so he wasn't the balance I believe for the hards were not ideal for him. But if you look at Carlos being able to, I mean, you can say that because of the fighting between Oscar and Charles, but the fact he was able to make up that time and get on the back of them. So I think it showed that at least it was between Ferrari and McLaren for who had the best car.
And of course, we have a new constructors leader in McLaren.
Yes.
Was very good to see. Red
Yeah,
Bull have been dethroned from their high horse.
It would have been closer just because if Checo had stayed, like if there wasn't a fight, it would have been it would have stayed close between Ferrari, Red Bull, and McLaren. McLaren still would have been taking the lead at this point, don't get me wrong. But with Checo and Sainz unfortunately crashing, it does take out a little bit of the momentum and it gives McLaren very good buffer for now being in the lead.
There is another factor as well. If Norris had qualified higher, he would have had a higher likelihood of scoring.
They would have got more points. You could state that Lando probably would have been make a case for him to be on the podium. I think it showed that the passing, it was possible, but the dirty air definitely played a part into it. Some key notes. So as I stated, it was made note that there were a bunch of incidents after the during the virtual safety car at the end, there have been some developments. So, Max and Esteban will be having a 5 pace grid penalty in Singapore, and it looks like there's no further action when it comes to Carlos and Checo's incident. So neither of them have penalty points or anything like that.
Nope. And with that, our good friend Gunther Steiner was, of course, conducting the pre-podium interviews, which saddened my heart.
But yeah, so Max and Esteban will have a little bit, especially Max. I think this more affects Max than Esteban, but
Yep.
Max getting a one at Singapore. So already not Red Bull have not been happy with Singapore. They've not been doing the greatest in the past at Singapore. So
No.
him getting an additional 5 place grid penalty does not help with him holding the driver standings championship.
No, absolutely not. That doesn't help his case either.
It's still a long shot for, I think, Lando to take the title, but it's still in play for both Lando and Charles. Again, it would have been easier for Charles if he won, because he would have actually been closer, because he needs to score 11 points more than Max going into this race for him to have a chance to take the title. Of course, that's not the case now, because he didn't win, and two, Max did score points. But it's still a long hike. So after this race, the standings of the top four, that's what I'm gonna calculate here. Max is at 313 points. Lando is at 254. Charles is at 235. And Oscar is at 222. I don't know how this is gonna go. It's standing wise. I think Max will still take it, but I think it's up for grabs who takes second.
You never know. Singapore is very unpredictable. So if Verstappen doesn't score and Norris were to win, which is a possibility, and if Norris again were to win both of the races in Austin next time after Singapore, that would catapult him towards the drivers.
Again, it's not impossible. I just think
No,
it's maybe a little bit more. It's harder now because of one, he qualified poorly in Baku, but also I think it's harder because you do have. I know as made note that McLaren was going to maybe favor Lando more, but
yes,
I
they
don't. I
announced
think,
that if there was a 50-50 decision, they would favor him as opposed to Piastri, which is perfectly understandable.
but now with Oscar winning,
That
Oscar makes the case to say no to that.
yes, he made a very convincing argument to shift that balance a little bit.
And I even state this is that the reason I say I think it's more of a fight for second is because if you have McLaren, I guess I'm going to say at this point, allowing the two of them to fight. And if I think the Ferrari will still be good throughout the rest of the season. They might not, I don't see them always being in the contention to win, but definitely being in the contention to be on the podium. But if you have Lando and Oscar fighting, I think that helps Charles more. It also helps Max, but I think it helps Charles more. And at this point in time, with just how the season is, and we all know that Carlos is leaving the team, I think Ferrari has no issue pulling the team orders. If towards the end of the race, like say we have a monster situation where Sainz is in second, Charles is in third. I don't see Ferrari not being like swap, because it's going to be the same. You're getting the same points for the constructors, but just in terms of standing, I think they'll back it. Also, I think, especially after the summer break, I think there's definitely been a change in Charles' attitude in terms of how he's approaching the rest of the season because he does know Lewis is coming next year. He's being more assertive. You saw him in quali. He asked, why haven't they got the slipstream down? They asked, Ferrari at one point asked him about a plan C, and he's like, that's stupid. Like, he's making clear decisions and he's being more assertive about what he's feeling in the car and letting his team know that. So it's still, if you're going to ask me who I think has the best chance to win, I'm saying Max. If you're asking me who I think has the best chance to beat Max right now, it's Lando. If you're asking me next year, I think Charles puts himself in the best position, especially if you watch Lewis's race this today. That was, he was nowhere.
Nope.
He hated that car.
Well, next year it could be anyone's race to win. Really.
I'm just saying, I think people, like, especially when Lewis was announced for Ferrari, people were a little scared and concerned about what this means for Charles, even though he just got that giant contract extension. I think the past three races, especially the past two in Monza and this one, you are seeing what maybe you should have saw in 2022. And I think this is also a wake-up call for Lewis about what he's about to go against.
Of course, we don't know what Mercedes will look like next year before the start of the season, or possibly also testing. But we will see.
So that, and then of course the constructors, because we do have a switch. So McLaren is actually taking the lead. They are now in first with 476 points. Red Bull is at second with 456 points, so 20 points behind McLaren. So not a nice buffer. Again, if Checo would have finished, it would have been closer. Ferrari is in third with 425, so they're still very much in play. Again, if Sainz would have finished, would have been closer. You have Mercedes being at just making it over the 300 points, so 309. That is the top four. That is Formula A. That is who you expect to be on the podiums. That is who we expect to be fighting next year. The rest of them, so fifth is still Aston Martin with 82 points. Stroll didn't score because, again, he did not finish, but Alonso finished in seventh. So a decent amount of points. You had RB, who didn't score anything. They're in 34th, but they have 34 points. You have Haas, who has 29 points right now. I think they still have a case to get sixth, especially because RB just has they've looked close, but really nowhere these past couple races. You have Williams in eighth with 16, and if this race shows anything, they have a chance to pip. I think both Red Bull Racing and Haas, I think it's going to be more down to Haas first Williams for who gets that sixth spot.
And if today is anything to go off of, I think that's gonna be a really close fight.
Yeah, and then you have Alpine at 13. They look abysmal.
Nothing new there.
I mean, if Gasly maybe didn't get a penalty, maybe he would have been in that fighting pack for points. So I feel like it's more resting on Gasly right now than Ocon. Ocon's kind of fallen off. I don't know if that's just because, again, he's not there next year, so they should be prioritizing Gasly. So,
which they are also doing.
and then in 10th, you have Sauber. 0 points. Still nothing. Still nothing for them to.
With that, we have Singapore next week.
We do have Singapore,
which will most likely be a very good watch.
Speaking of the wheelie bins, would you like to know where they finished?
All right, give it to me.
So Valtteri finished 16th. He was the last on-road person to finish, a lap down. And then Zhou finished 14th. He finished ahead of his teammate. He finished ahead of Ocon, and he didn't get lapped.
Oh, what do you expect? It's a Sauber. Yeah.
He didn't get lapped. The dude usually finished last. Also, it should be made note that with Franco Colapinto scoring 4 points, Joe goes down to P20, Logan is down to P21, and Valtteri is in P22. So the question will be, does Valtteri get finished 11th? Will he finish above Logan? Also be made note, Oliver Behrman has passed Magnussen with 7 points over Magnussen's 6 points, so Ollie is in 16th to Magnussen's 17th.
And with that, we shall conclude this episode.
Good race. I look
Yes.
forward to Singapore.
Good race, good weekend, chaos, crash
Yes.
ahoy.
Crash ahoy. Here's hoping Singapore can keep the delivering going. I
Yes.
very much would like to have these good races continue, especially
Yes.
as we're about to head into a 4-week gap.
Yes, I do enjoy Singapore as a track. So hopefully Singapore keeps on its habit of delivering.
We're getting into our night races of the year. So we have Singapore, which will
Yes.
be a night race. Then we'll have Texas, Mexico, and Brazil, who are day races. Then we have Vegas, which will be our next night race. Then we have Qatar, which is also a night race. And then
Last
we
but not
conclude,
least, we have Abu Dhabi.
which is like a night,
Night-ish.
sundown to night.
Day-night hybrid.
Day-night hybrid. We get the floodlights.
Yes.
We get darkness because they shoot fireworks.
Darkness cometh.
But here's hoping for a good rest of the season. Again, as much as I'm like, there's a chance for Lando to get the drivers, I don't think it's going to happen. I think we're looking at a fight for P2 at this point. Anyway, thanks for listening or watching, guys. That concludes our review of Azerbaijan weekend. Feel free to give us a like, rate us. We have all our socials at _paddock. You feel free to drop us a comment there. You can also drop any questions you have at the pit lane through the link in our Spotify description. But enjoy your rest of your week. We will see you all in Singapore. Another early morning for me, but it's fine. I'll take it in stride.
The 2 p.m. racer for me. Woohoo!
I believe it's an 8 a.m. race for me. Let me confirm or deny this. Yes, it's an 8 a.m. It's an hour later than this one was. I was up at 7 this morning for this race. I'm up at 8 next week. It's fine.
All right.
And we have F1 Academy next week too, so that'll be good to look forward to.
Yep. And this concludes this episode.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.